A silent rider buys a mother and child, unaware that she would heal his heart. "Can you take my sister instead of me?" asked the boy. The cowboy said nothing, then took both. The wind tore through the barren plain, dry and merciless. It was a familiar sound to Caleb, a constant companion in the profound silence of his homestead. A noise that scraped away at the edges of his solitude, but never breached its core. He lived in a world of dust and distance, his days marked by the creak of floorboards and the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood. His eyes, tired and weathered, had seen everything and now chose to see very little. He was a man hollowed out by loss, his silence a monument to a wife and child buried on the hill behind his cabin, their names swallowed by the same unforgiving wind. He rode into the town of redemption only when necessity demanded it, for salt and flour and nails. The town was a place of noise and judgment, its voices a grating intrusion. Today the noise was different. A crowd had gathered in the dusty main square, their faces a mixture of grim curiosity and cruel sport. At the center, on the raw timber of the sheriff's auction block, stood a man whose face was as hard and broad as his wealth, a land baron named Sterling. Beside him, looking smaller than life, stood a woman and a small boy. The woman, Alara, was a study in concealed suffering. She was not broken, not shattered, but worn down to a state of rigid endurance, her hands clasped tight in front of her. Her son, a boy of maybe 6 with eyes too old for his face, clung to the thin fabric of her skirt. Caleb watched from the edge of the crowd, his horse shifting beneath him. Sterling's voice boomed, thick with satisfaction. "Foreclosed on the Miller place. Got 2 able bodies here, indentured for 5 years to pay the debt. Who'll start the bidding for the woman?" A low murmur went through the crowd. Alara flinched, a barely perceptible tremor that ran through her weary shoulders. Caleb felt a familiar coldness settle in his chest, the same cold that had lived there for 3 years. He was about to turn his horse, to retreat back to the quiet dignity of his own pain, when the boy stepped forward. His voice was small but clear in the sudden hush. "Can you take my sister instead of me?" He pointed a trembling finger at his mother. The crowd chuckled, a low, ugly sound. Sterling sneered. "She ain't his sister, she's his mother. And they come as a pair, boy. Now get back." The boy's face crumpled, and he hid himself again behind his mother's legs. Alara did not cry. She simply closed her eyes, a lone figure bracing for the final bitter blow. It was then that something in Caleb cracked. A memory flickered, the ghost of his own son's small hand in his. An impulse, raw and powerful, surged through his numbness. He didn't know it yet, but his first true home was right in front of him. He urged his horse forward. The crowd parted. He said nothing. He just stopped before the block and looked at Sterling, his gaze as flat and unforgiving as the winter sky. Caleb's presence stilled the square. Men who knew him by sight knew him as the silent recluse from the high plains, a man who kept to himself with an almost religious devotion. To see him here at the center of this public humiliation was an event in itself. Sterling, momentarily thrown off balance, recovered with a smirk. "Well, look what the wind blew in. Caleb, come to join the festivities." Caleb's gaze didn't waver. It dropped from Sterling's face to the woman and child, then back again. He reached into the leather pouch on his belt, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The sound of coins clinking was sharp in the cold air. He counted out the full sum of the debt, a heavy weight of silver and gold that represented years of solitary work, and placed it on the rough-hewn wood of the block. The metal rang with finality. He did not speak, not a single word. Sterling's eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in greedy recognition. He scooped up the coins, his posture puffing with the victory of commerce. "Sold," he declared to the silent crowd. To the silent man, he gestured dismissively at Alara and her son. "They're yours." Alara stood frozen, her face a mask of exhausted disbelief. Her journey from fear to a deeper, more uncertain fear had just begun. She had been bought. Her son, Leo, peeked out from behind her, his eyes wide with a child's simple terror. Caleb dismounted. He walked not to her, but to his horse, and began untying the spare blanket rolled behind his saddle. He approached her slowly, as one might approach a spooked animal. He held out the coarse wool blanket. Her eyes, shadowed and alert, met his for a moment. She saw no triumph in them, no ownership. She saw only a vast, empty landscape, as desolate as the one she was leaving behind. She hesitated, her body rigid with suspicion. Her life had taught her that kindness was just a mask for cruelty. But the wind was biting, and the boy was shivering. With a trembling hand, she took the blanket and wrapped it around Leo's small shoulders first, then her own. Caleb turned and walked to the general store without a backward glance. He returned with a sack of flour, beans, and a small paper poke of candy, which he pressed into the boy's hand without a word. The child stared at the offering, then at his mother. Alara gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Leo clutched the candy like a precious stone. The journey back to Caleb's homestead was a long, silent procession. Caleb led his horse, with Alara and Leo walking a few paces behind. The only sounds were the plod of hooves in the dust, the whisper of the wind, and the faint, frightened breaths of a woman and a child stepping into an unknown future. They were his now. The thought was a leaden weight in Caleb's gut. He had not acted out of desire, but out of a sudden, sharp pain, an atonement for a ghost. He had simply exchanged one form of silence for another. The homestead was a lonely testament to endurance. A small cabin and a sturdy barn huddled against the vast, slate evening sky. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, a thin, gray thread against the encroaching dark. To Alara, it looked like the edge of the world. Caleb led them to the cabin door, the wood weathered and solid beneath his hand. He pushed it open, revealing a single room, clean but stark. A stone hearth dominated one wall, a simple table and 2 chairs stood in the center, and a narrow bed was built into the far corner. There was a second door, smaller, leading to a storage room at the back. He gestured toward it. "You can stay there," he said. The words felt foreign in his mouth, rough from disuse. He then turned, took a bucket and walked toward the well, leaving her standing on the threshold. She stayed. The word was a silent, heavy thing in the air between them. Alara watched him go, his shoulders weary but straight. She stepped inside, pulling Leo with her. The room was cold, but the lingering smell of wood smoke was not entirely unwelcoming. She looked at the small door he had indicated. Pushing it open, she found a space no bigger than a closet, but it was dry and clean. A narrow cot with a thin mattress and a folded blanket sat against the wall. A home within a home, a cage within a cage. She didn't know which it was. That night, and for many nights after, they lived in a shared silence broken only by the necessary sounds of existence. The creak of the wooden door as she took Leo outside. The metallic clink of a tin cup on the table. The soft swish of the broom against the floorboards. Caleb slept in his chair by the fire, a rifle across his lap, leaving the bed for them. It was a gesture she didn't understand, and therefore didn't trust. Her days fell into a quiet rhythm of routine. She rose before the pale winter sun, rekindled the fire in the stove, and made coffee. She swept the floor, washed their few dishes, and mended Leo's worn clothes with thread she found in a small wooden box. She did it all with an unobtrusive dignity, moving through the small cabin like a ghost, her presence felt but rarely seen. She was alert, every nerve taut. She watched Caleb's hands, saw they were calloused and capable, but never raised in anger. She watched his eyes, saw the deep, concealed pain in them, and recognized it as a language she knew well. He was a man drowning in his own quiet, and she and her son were now tied to him, 2 more stones pulling him under. He ate the simple meals she prepared without comment, a quiet nod his only form of thanks. He chopped wood deep into the night, the relentless, percussive sound echoing his inner turmoil, as if he were splitting his own guilt into manageable pieces. They were 2 separate islands of suffering, orbiting each other in the silent universe of the small cabin. Trust was a currency neither of them possessed. Forgiveness was a forgotten country. All they had was the daily rhythm, the shared space, the biting wind outside, and the vast, unspoken chasm between them. The seasons began to turn, but the frost between them remained. Caleb watched her from a distance, seeing things she thought were hidden. He saw the way she favored her left foot, and looking closer one morning while she was fetching water, he saw the worn-down sole of her shoe, thin as paper. He saw the way Leo's small coat was patched and repatched, a testament to her care but a poor defense against the frosty air. A strange, protective instinct began to stir beneath the layers of his numbness, an unwelcome and unfamiliar warmth. He fought it. He had brought them here to salve a wound, not to open a new one. Yet, the sight of their quiet hardship gnawed at him. He rode to town alone one afternoon, a rare trip made not for supplies, but with a specific, secret purpose. He returned after dusk, long after Alara and Leo had retreated to their small room. Under the cold starlight, he approached the cabin door. He hesitated, his hand on the parcel. This was a line being crossed, an acknowledgement, an intrusion. He swallowed, the sound loud in the immense quiet. He left the package on the doorstep and retreated to the barn, his usual refuge. The next morning, when Alara opened the door to fetch firewood, she saw it. A plain brown paper parcel tied with twine. Her first reaction was fear, a tightening in her chest. It was a gift, and gifts always came with a price. She looked around the empty yard, at the barn where she knew he slept. She took the package inside, her hands trembling slightly. Inside were a pair of sturdy leather shoes, small and new, and a thick wool coat for a boy. They were not fancy. They were practical, reliable, honest. She stood holding the coat, its weight a surprise in her hands. She ran her fingers over the rough, warm wool. Then she looked at the shoes. They were her size. He had noticed. This small act of observation felt more intimate than any touch, more startling than any word. She didn't know how to react. Suspicion told her it was a chain, another link of ownership. But a small, fragile part of her, a part she thought had long since died, felt a flicker of something else. Hope. She said nothing to him. When he came in for his morning coffee, she was wearing the new shoes. Her silence was her acknowledgement. Her acceptance was his. A few days later, Leo was playing near the woodpile when a splinter, long and vicious, drove deep into his hand. His cry was sharp with pain and terror. Alara rushed to him, her face pale with worry. She tried to remove it, but it was buried deep, and her every attempt only made him cry harder. Caleb heard the cries from the barn. He strode over, his face grim. Alara looked up at him, her eyes pleading. For the first time, she was asking him for something. He crouched down, his large frame seeming to swallow the small boy. "Let me see," he said, his voice low and calm. Leo, terrified of this huge, silent man, tried to pull away. Caleb didn't force him. He simply waited, his large, calloused hand held out, palm up. After a long moment, Leo, sobbing softly, extended his small, wounded hand. Caleb's touch was surprisingly gentle. He examined the splinter, then looked at Alara. "I'll need a needle," and hot water. She flew to obey. This was the first time they had worked together, a shared purpose breaking the rigid separation. Something was changing. It was unsteady. It was growing. A week later, the sky turned a bruised, slate gray and the wind began to howl, a low, mournful sound that promised violence. A blizzard descended on the high plains, burying the world in a churning vortex of white. For 2 days, they were sealed inside the cabin, the storm a roaring beast outside the wooden door. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the small room, the fire in the hearth their only sun. The enforced closeness was a new kind of trial. The silence, once a buffer, was now thick with unspoken thoughts. On the second night, Leo began to cough, a dry, rasping sound. By morning, he was burning with fever. Alara's quiet dignity crumbled into raw, maternal fear. She bathed his forehead with a cool cloth, her hands trembling. She tried to get him to drink water from a tin cup, but he was listless, his eyes glassy. She crouched by the bed, whispering his name, her own breathing shallow and ragged with panic. Caleb watched from his chair by the fire. He saw the terror in her eyes, a mirror of a memory he fought daily to suppress. He remembered another small body, hot with fever. He remembered the feeling of utter helplessness, of watching a life slip away like smoke. The pain was a physical blow, sharp and immediate. He stood up. Alara flinched as he approached, her body instinctively shielding her son. He stopped a few feet away. "There's a tea," he said, his voice rough. "Willow bark. It breaks the fever." She just stared at him, her face a mask of exhaustion and distrust. He didn't wait for her permission. He went to a small chest in the corner, a chest he hadn't opened in 3 years, and took out a dried bundle of herbs. His hands were unsteady as he prepared the brew, the simple actions dredging up a deep well of grief. He brought the steaming cup to the bed. "Hold him up," he said softly. She hesitated for only a second before complying, her fear for her son overriding her fear of the man. Together, they managed to get a few sips of the bitter tea into the boy. For the rest of the night, Caleb did not return to his chair. He sat on the floor by the bed, replacing the cool cloth on Leo's forehead, listening to the boy's ragged breathing. He did not speak. He just stayed. Alara watched him from the other side of the small bed. In the smoky lamplight, she saw the lines of pain etched around his mouth, the profound sadness in his tired eyes. She saw not a captor, not a buyer, but a fellow survivor, a man marked by a loss as deep as her own. The wall of her suspicion, already cracked, began to crumble into dust. She saw his gentleness with her son, a quiet, unobtrusive care that asked for nothing in return. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered windows with a pale, ethereal light, Leo's fever broke. His breathing eased, and he fell into a deep, healing sleep. Alara looked across her sleeping son at Caleb, whose head was now resting against the wall. His eyes closed in exhaustion. A single, silent tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. It was a tear not of sorrow, but of a fragile, dawning gratitude. The storm outside had passed. So too had the storm inside. Weeks turned into a tentative spring. The snow melted, revealing the muddy, thawing earth. A fragile green began to push through the brown. The silence in the cabin had changed. It was no longer a wall of separation, but a shared space of quiet understanding. They still spoke little, but their movements were no longer cautious orbits. They were a rhythm, a quiet dance of domesticity. Caleb would leave a pail of fresh milk on the table each morning. Alara would leave a hot plate of food for him by the fire when he came in late from the barn. They were small gestures, quiet offerings laid at the altar of their shared solitude. One day, the supply of flour ran out completely. The trip to redemption was unavoidable. The thought of returning to that town sent a sliver of ice through Alara's veins. But necessity was a harsh master. This time, they went together. Caleb hitched the wagon, and Alara sat on the wooden bench with Leo between them. The boy, fully recovered and warmed by the gentle spring sun, chattered quietly, a sound of life in the vast landscape. As they pulled into the main street, Alara felt the old tension return to her shoulders. She pulled the collar of her worn coat tighter, her gaze lowered. She could feel the eyes of the townsfolk on them, their stares a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Caleb seemed not to notice, his expression as impassive as ever. He guided the wagon to the front of the general store and helped her down. As she turned, a voice, slick with malice, cut through the air. Well, if it isn't the hermit and his bought property, it was Sterling. He stood on the boardwalk, flanked by 2 of his hired men, a cruel smile on his face. Alara froze, the blood draining from her face. She felt Leo press closer to her side. Sterling took a step forward, his eyes fixed on Alara with a look of leering ownership. "Enjoying your new life, girl? Must be quiet up there." A man like Caleb probably ain't got much to say. Laughter, coarse and ugly, followed from his men. Alara lowered her gaze. Shame and fear a hot, bitter flood. She felt small, exposed, her dignity stripped away under the public gaze. She braced herself for the inevitable humiliation. But it didn't come from Sterling. Instead, something shifted beside her. Caleb moved. He didn't lunge or shout. He simply stepped in front of her, placing his body between her and Sterling. It was a simple, deliberate movement, as solid and unmovable as a mountain. He stood there, silent but firm, a living shield. The crowd that had started to gather fell silent. Sterling's smirk faltered. He had expected the silent man to remain silent. "Get out of the way, Caleb. My business is with her." Caleb's voice, when it came, was low and clear, carrying across the silent street with an astonishing power. "She's with me." He paused, his gaze locking with Sterling's. Then he said the words that would change everything. "Not bought. Chosen." A collective breath was drawn from the onlookers. The declaration hung in the air, stunning and absolute. Sterling was speechless, his face turning a blotchy red. Humiliated, he turned and stalked away, his men trailing behind him like curs. Caleb did not watch him go. He turned back to Alara. She was looking at him, her face streaked with tears. But for the first time, they were not tears of pain or fear. They were tears of profound, overwhelming relief. He stayed. He had chosen her. That evening, the air on the porch of the small cabin felt different. The setting sun painted the sky in tender shades of orange and rose, and the wind in the dry grass whispered secrets instead of threats. They sat not in their usual separate spaces, but together on the top step, a tin cup of coffee in Alara's hands, Caleb's hands resting on his knees. The silence between them was now a comfortable blanket, woven with the threads of the day's events. It was Alara who finally spoke, her voice soft, barely disturbing the quiet. "My husband, he made a bad deal with Sterling. For seed. The drought came and the debt grew. He couldn't face it." She paused, swallowing hard. "He left. One night, he just left me and Leo with the debt." She stared out at the fading light, her story laid bare in the open air. She had never told anyone. There had been no one to tell. She expected Caleb to say nothing, to offer only his usual stoic presence. He listened, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. He understood debt. He understood abandonment. After a long moment, he spoke, his own voice low and raw with a pain that was years old but still fresh. "There's a grave on the hill." He gestured with his chin towards the rise behind the cabin. Two of them. Alara turned to look at him. She saw the confession in the deep lines of his face, the suppressed agony that lived behind his eyes. "My wife, Sarah, and my son, Daniel." He said their names as if they were stones in his mouth. "Fever. The same kind Leo had. I was away trading pelts. By the time I got back," he didn't need to finish. The story was in the tremble of his jaw, in the bleak finality of his tone. He had been punishing himself for it ever since. His reclusive life a self-imposed prison sentence. His guilt was the reason he had bought them. He saw in Leo a chance to save the son he had lost. In Alara a duty to the wife he had failed to protect. It was a penance, an act of redemption. Alara looked from his haunted face to the hill where the sun had just disappeared. She imagined the two small mounds of earth, the silent testament to his grief. She understood it all now. His silence, his pain, his sudden, inexplicable kindness. They were two halves of the same broken heart. Without thinking, she reached out and her hand touched his arm. It was a simple, unobtrusive gesture. Not of pity, but of profound, shared understanding. His muscles tensed for a second, surprised by the contact, then relaxed under her gentle touch. He did not pull away. In that quiet moment, as the first stars began to prick the deep violet sky, they were no longer alone. The heavy burden of the past, carried in silence for so long, was finally shared. They were strong together. They were a beginning. The winter of their sorrow thawed into a true and lasting spring. The homestead, once a monument to one man's grief, began to breathe with a new, gentle life. The change was not in grand pronouncements, but in the small, daily proofs of a growing closeness. Caleb started taking his meals at the table, across from her, the empty chair between them no longer a symbol of loss but a space of quiet companionship. Leo's laughter, once a rarity, became a frequent sound, echoing from the barn as he followed Caleb, helping with chores, his small hands trying to imitate the man's steady, capable ones. Caleb began to build things, not just fences and woodpiles, but things of comfort. He mended the loose step on the porch. He built a small, sturdy bookshelf next to the hearth, and one day returned from town with 2 worn books of stories, which he silently placed upon it. One afternoon, Alara found him in the barn, carefully carving a piece of seasoned pine. He was working with a quiet, focused deliberation, the shavings curling at his feet. She watched him for a moment, unseen. He was not making a cradle, a shape his hands knew from a painful past. He was making a rocker, its lines simple and honest. For her, while he worked with wood, she worked with the earth. Behind the cabin, in a patch of ground cleared by Caleb, she planted a small garden. She turned the rich, dark soil with a shovel, her hands finding a familiar, grounding rhythm. She planted seeds for beans and squash and herbs, her hopes buried with them in the earth, trusting the sun and the rain. It was her claim on the future, her vote for life. They were building a home, not with words, but with actions. It was in the bread she baked, its warm scent filling the cabin. It was in the clean, mended shirt he found laid out for him in the morning. It was in the way he started talking to Leo, his words still few, but his tone gentle, explaining how to spot a hawk's nest or how to tell which clouds carried rain. Their homestead thrived. The fields grew greener, the gardens sprouted, and the quiet rhythm of their life became a song. The past was not forgotten. The 2 graves on the hill were still there, a part of the landscape. But now they were not just a place of sorrow. Alara would sometimes place a wildflower on them, a quiet acknowledgement of the woman and child who had made Caleb the man he was. He was no longer just a silent rider, a man defined by his solitude. She was no longer just a resilient survivor, a woman defined by her hardship. They were becoming a family. The winter had passed. A true home had been found, not in a place, but in each other. There is a quiet strength that grows in the desolate places of the world, and in the desolate places of the heart. It grows where no one is looking, nurtured not by grand declarations, but by the steady, unobtrusive rhythm of shared work and silent understanding. Love, the truest kind, does not always arrive with a thunderclap. Sometimes, it seeps in slowly, like rain into dry earth, filling the cracks of a broken spirit until it is whole again. From the dust of public shame and the silence of private grief, a home was built. It was built with the steady swing of an axe, the gentle tending of a garden, the shared warmth of a hearth fire on a cold night. It was fortified by a single, brave act in a dusty town square, a choice that remade 3 lives. From closed hearts, bruised and guarded from the world's cruelty, a family was formed. It was a family born not of blood, but of a deeper bond. The shared language of loss, the cautious rediscovery of trust, and the profound, simple comfort of no longer being alone. Caleb did not set out to find a wife, nor Alara a husband. They were 2 souls adrift in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of their own pain. But in saving her, he saved himself. In trusting him, she found a place to finally rest her weary shoulders and let her own quiet strength blossom. Their story is a testament to the power of small gestures. A blanket offered against the cold, a pair of new shoes left on a doorstep, a hand resting gently on an arm in the twilight. These are the things that rebuild a world. These are the moments where silence means everything, where a shared glance across a room can hold more truth than 1,000 words. Their love grew in that quiet, nourished by mutual respect and the slow, steady healing of time. The homestead was no longer just a piece of land. It was a sanctuary. It was proof that even after the harshest winter, spring will always return, bringing with it the chance for new growth, new hope, and new life. The pain of the past was not erased, but integrated, becoming the solid foundation upon which they built their future. A future filled with the sound of a child's laughter and the peaceful rhythm of a rocking chair on a sun-drenched porch. The final piece was a small, carved bird on the arm of the rocker, a detail no one would notice but him. Caleb ran his thumb over the smooth wood one last time, his work complete. He carried the chair from the barn into the cabin, its weight solid and comforting in his arms. The afternoon sun streamed through the newly washed window, illuminating the dancing dust motes in the air. The window was open, a thing that had never happened in his years of solitude, and a gentle breeze stirred the simple cloth curtains Alara had made. She stood by that open window, looking out at her flourishing garden, a soft, calm expression on her face. She turned as he entered, her eyes falling on the rocker. A slow, genuine smile bloomed on her lips, a flower he had waited a lifetime to see. He set the rocker down near the hearth, in the spot where she liked to sit and mend clothes in the evening light. He stepped back, looking from the chair to her. All the words he didn't have, all the feelings he couldn't name, were held in that single, finished piece of wood. It was an offering, promise, prayer. He looked at her, standing in the warm light, her quiet dignity a beacon in his world. "Stay here," he said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything. "Stay here where you are safe. Stay here where you are chosen. Stay here and let this be our home." She did not need to answer. He saw the reply in her eyes, a deep and resounding yes. She walked over to the rocker and sat down, her hand resting on the carved bird. She stayed. From dust and silence grew a home. From closed hearts, a family. Their story reminds us that the deepest connections are often forged in the quietest moments, and the greatest strength is found in the courage to care for another. True love is not about finding a perfect person, but about finding a safe harbor in an imperfect world, a place where two solitudes can protect and nurture each other. If the story touched you, like warm light in a cold night, then carry it with you. Let it be a reminder that kindness is never wasted, that even the most wounded hearts can heal, and that there is a profound and beautiful dignity in survival. Home is not a place you find, but a place you build, one quiet, deliberate, and loving gesture at a time. Subscribe to our channel for more stories full of silence, courage, and genuine closeness. And tell us what moved you the most: the boy's brave question, the silent man's choice, or the moment a simple touch on an arm bridged two worlds. We'll see you again, where silence means home.